Whether or not it's intended, most fictional heroes seem to share at least some attributes with the ultimate hero, Jesus Christ. It's not surprising, since Christianity has been an integral part of many cultures around the world for millennia, and Jesus Christ embodies traits such as courage, selflessness, and sacrifice. Every once in a while, however, there's a fictional character who stands out as just a little more Christ-like than the rest. Perhaps none more than Vash the Stampede, the protagonist of Trigun, a series absolutely drenched in Christian themes. Let's talk Trigun and Christian symbolism. Before we begin, we need to talk about Christ typology. A type of Christ is a person, item, animal, or ritual that reminds us of some aspect of Jesus Christ. It's a symbolic representation of Christ to help us understand him better. Today we're going to talk about a fictional type of Christ, much like Aslan from the Chronicles of Narnia, Gandalf and other characters from The Lord of the Rings, and even Harry Potter. Types of Christ don't necessarily have to be intended by the creator in order to qualify. Sometimes a creator's beliefs subconsciously seep into their work. Sometimes the audience just sees what they want to see, and that's okay, because that's the beauty of fiction. Other times, the creator may not even believe in the Bible at all, but because our Western culture is so deeply rooted in biblical foundations, scriptural symbolism can still find its way in. But when something so saturated with Christian themes comes out of a country like Japan, it warrants a second look. Christianity is a fairly new religion in the land of the rising sun, since the country was largely isolated from the rest of the world until the mid-1800s. Today, Christians are a small religious minority, only making up about 1% of Japan. So when something like Trigun is created, one has to assume most, if not all, the biblical symbolism was consciously intended. It should go without saying that no representation of Christ in fiction is perfect, or it would simply be, well, Jesus Christ himself. So not every part of Vash the Stampede from Trigun is Christ-like, because, like all well-written characters, he's flawed and has his own unique personality. Vash is a massive dork who's obsessed with donuts. He doesn't always think things through. He's girl-crazy, yet constantly gets rejected. He gets drunk easily and acts like an idiot. For those reasons, I worry that some may find it sacrilegious to compare such a dorky, comedic character to Jesus Christ. But we should remember that if not for these flaws and funny personality traits, Vash would make for a bland, unrelatable fictional character. I feel the creators did a phenomenal job of striking the perfect balance between symbolism and entertainment. Speaking of the creators, the primary brain and talent behind Trigun is manga artist and writer Yasuhiro Naito. He created the series in the 90s, and a wildly popular anime followed shortly thereafter. This year, a remake/prequel of Trigun was released with a stunning new aesthetic and an equally beautiful story. I know very little about the creator, except that he is a Christian convert. Internet rumors claim his denomination is Catholic, which does seem to align with the content of Trigun, but I can't confirm that. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. I don't claim to know Naito's motivations or beliefs, so this video is certainly not meant to put words in his mouth. I'm only going to describe what I happen to see in Trigun, which is no doubt colored by the lens of my own beliefs. Maybe you saw something entirely different. Your interpretation is equally valid, and I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments. For the purpose of this video, I'll be drawing from the original Trigun anime, the new Trigun Stampede series, as well as the manga. In other words, the full Trigun trinity. So let's get a quick-ish overview of the plot. This is replete with spoilers, so continue at your own discretion. Prior to the beginning of our story, Earth was rendered unable to support life any longer. In an effort to save humanity, a space colony called Project Seeds was formed. The goal was to relocate humans by placing them in cold sleep and setting out into space to find a new home. Meanwhile, scientists created new life forms they called plants, like power plant plants, but I guess also like the leafy green kind, because they're living and kinda look like alien women who emerge from flowers. Anyway, these entities had the ability to generate energy, which humans found particularly valuable for sustaining them in their vulnerable deep space state. So they harnessed the energy of these beings to power their ships. But one day something unexpected happened. A plant gave birth to two new plants, twin boys, much like in the way human beings are born. It quickly became obvious that these plants were different than the rest, less alien and more human. Unlike the enslaved, soulless plants, the twins had free will. so the humans called them independents. They were also highly intelligent and had certain special abilities. The boys' names were Vash and Knives. REM Saverem was an exceptionally compassionate crew member aboard one ship. She took the boys, sensitive Vash and calculating Knives, under her wing and raised them as her own. She became their mother for all intents and purposes. REM believed they would all eventually find their perfect Eden on a new fruitful planet.
We'll find a place to create our new home. And when we get there,
there will be nothing but peaceful days.
With no war.
And no stealing.
An Eden where people can live in freedom and harmony, right?
Wrong. Things didn't exactly go as planned. One day, all the ships began malfunctioning simultaneously. REM forced young Vash and Knives onto escape pods, but she remained behind in an attempt to save as many people in cold sleep as possible. Most of the humans died, including REM, but the small percentage who survived crash-landed on a desert planet. This event would hereafter be known as the Big Fall. We learn later that young Knives was responsible for the crash. He felt humans were exploiting and enslaving his fellow plants, so he grew to hate humanity. The crash was his attempt to eradicate human life completely, allowing for a world where plants could reign supreme. And he would have gotten away with it too, if not for that meddling REM. Everyone who did survive had REM to thank for it. Because REM sacrificed herself to save humanity, she could accurately be labeled a Christ figure herself. But I think she's a more fitting representation of someone else that we'll talk about later. Fast forward some 130 years later, and the survivors of the crash, or their descendants, have made do on this desolate planet they call No Man's Land. The population is small because living on this planet isn't exactly easy. They continue to be sustained by the power plant organisms that crashed along with them. Of course, there are a limited number of plants, most towns having only a few that they share among their community. To make matters more complicated, almost anyone who had any knowledge of how the plants work had died in the fall, so the plants are considered lost tech. No one knows how the plants work, how to make new ones, or even how to heal one that malfunctions. This makes these mysterious life-sustaining entities the most valuable resources in their world, which of course leads to criminals trying to steal them. The struggle for power breeds rough, violent gangs of outlaws who frequently risk the safety of innocents. Every man, woman, and child seems to be packing some kind of firepower for defense. Tensions are always high and peace is rare. So if the harsh elements, sandworms, and lack of resources don't kill you, other trigger-happy humans just might. Life on this desert planet is delicate to say the least. With that backstory in mind, we may already see some biblical parallels. We've got a miracle birth, a sacrifice, a hostile traitor causing the big fall, calling to mind the devil in the form of a serpent who caused the fall of mankind. This of course cast humanity out of their Garden of Eden ideals, and placed them into a difficult wasteland full of opposition instead. But we're just getting started. When our story begins, Vash is still alive. Though he's an adult now, he's seemingly ageless after 130 years, indicating that he has some degree of immortality. He's now known as Vash the Stampede, or the Humanoid Typhoon, an unusually skilled gunslinger with a massive bounty on his head. Rumors of his supposed murders and atrocities precede him everywhere he goes, making Vash a household name, and not in a good way. Ironically, Vash is actually the most peace-loving, pacifistic soul on the entire planet.
You some kind of gunman?
Huh? I guess, but I'm really not much of a fighter.
He's wildly misunderstood by general society, partly because of his resemblance to the true criminal, Knives, and partly because trouble just seems to follow him everywhere he goes. Vash keeps his identity as a plant hidden, but to most, it's obvious Vash is more than a mere human. His accuracy with a gun is legendary, and he has an uncanny ability to dodge speeding bullets. Vash also holds the inexplicable power to bring dying plants back to life simply by touching them, a skill no one else holds. This healing touch and power over death might remind some Christian viewers of another misunderstood superhuman being who could also heal with nothing but a touch. Vash lost his arm in events we won't delve into, and in its place, he sports a high-tech prosthetic that can turn into yet another gun. His remaining arm, called his angel arm because it's literally made up of what appears to be angels, has the ability to turn into a weapon of mass destruction, much like an atomic bomb. Does this remind anyone else of the destroying angels from the Bible? But despite not being human himself, and having overwhelming power to kill, even to destroy entire cities in one blow if he wanted to, no one cares more about human life than Vash, a trait he inherited from his kind adoptive mother, and he does everything within his power to save everyone, not just the good guys, but the bad guys as well. One striking example of this is the Jeneora rock incident. Vash had previously helped this small village by healing one of their plants, effectively saving the whole town from starvation, much like someone else miraculously fed a hungry group of over 5,000. As a result, the townspeople became pretty fond of Vash, considering him their savior. But when their second plant began to die, it didn't take long for the town to turn against Vash in order to collect the massive bounty on his head. So out of a sense of self-preservation, Vash's previous friends held him at gunpoint, ready to kill him and collect the bounty. This betrayal of a friend who had previously saved them invokes the image of the traitorous Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed his savior to the authorities for nothing but money. But before the townsfolk had time to carry out their scheme, a couple villains from the infamous Nebraska family arrived to steal the town's good plant. Jeneora Rock is having a bad day, but Vash, being the incredibly selfless and forgiving person he is, fights to defend the town despite their betrayal. In the midst of all of this, the father of the wicked Nebraska family asks a poignant question.
Why would you save a city full of traitors?
These people were kind to me. It's that simple. I want to save them.
Even friends who betrayed him are precious to Vash, but Vash wasn't finished.
If you'll let me, I want to save you too.
He was determined to save two separate groups who had both tried to kill him that very day. This begs the question,
Who the hell's side are you on?
everyone seems to be wondering the same thing.
Who the hell side are you on?
Whose side are you on?
This reminds me of Jesus, who was constantly perplexing onlookers about which side he was on. Did he side with the Pharisees or Sadducees, zealots or publicans, Rome or Israel, rich or poor, Jew or Gentile, saint or sinner? Jesus was on everyone's side, so no one could ever quite figure him out. In fact, he even famously ate with sinners. Can we pause on this scene for a minute? Did anyone else catch this? Vash is sitting at a table with the Nebraska family, the very reformed villains who just tried to kill him moments earlier. In fact, he's celebrating with an entire town who just tried to kill him, and each other. Through his amazing peacemaking skills, Vash got bitter enemies to get along. Talk about eating and drinking with sinners. Talk about bursting the entire concept of sides. But that's the point. To Vash, there are no sides. He considers the whole human race his family. Back on the ship before the crash, young Vash knew the name of every human in Cold Sleep, and he loved them all.
Hello, Jeff! Looking good, Arthur! Nice to see you, Kate.
Val. Jones. Lumira. Farina. I remember all of you.
The people now living around him on this desert planet are the descendants of those he considered friends. Because of his long life, Vash likely knew a lot of their parents, grandparents, great-grandparents. A moment in the manga illustrates this beautifully. When Vash risked his life to save some people in a dangerous situation, a couple onlookers discuss. I don't understand it at all. It was to prevent disaster. I get that part, but why go through all that risk and danger like a frantic idiot when it leaves him drop-dead exhausted like that? Well, let me put it like this then. What if I had gotten caught in there? Would you have come to save me? Of course I would have. We're kin. Exactly. But to Vash the Stampede, let's just say that his perception of kin is ridiculously broad. The fact that Vash thinks of human beings as kin is incredibly generous of him, considering his dark history with humans that we won't get into. The bottom line is that Vash certainly has reason to hate humanity, but Vash is incredibly forgiving. And Vash is not a human, but a plant, like the very plants that give life to the people on this desert planet. He's literally made of the stuff that sustains humans, much like Jesus Christ, who is the living water and bread of life that sustains us. Jesus Christ considers the whole human family his kin as well. Christ came for all of us, even the bad guys. He sacrificed himself for the very people who murdered him. It's probably clear by now that Vash is not the typical action hero. He's actually a little more than that. And like Christ, and despite his incredible power, Vash is humble beyond belief.
You're a superior being.
I disagree.
You're that Vash the Stampede, aren't you?
You know about little old me?
Everybody knows you.
Well, that's news to me.
One of the most stark examples of this was his rescue of Lina. When a violent gang threatened a young girl Vash cared about, he stepped outside to negotiate with them. As a way to show complete submission and humility, he prostrates himself on the ground and begs them to leave the girl alone. When the villains find that amusing, they demand that Vash strip off all his clothes and act like a dog, of course not expecting him to actually do it. Who in their right mind would humiliate themselves like that for the sake of someone else? Well, Vash. Vash would. Without hesitation. He actually does it.
You must have some sense of pride as a gunman!
Yeah, no.
Keep in mind that Vash did not do this for lack of options. He was more powerful than all those gang members combined. With his superhuman gunmanship, not to mention his city-destroying angel arm, killing every last one of those men would have been all too easy. But in Vash's mind, any solution, even one that completely humiliated him, was better than hurting someone, even someone who deserved it. Christ, too, willingly submitted to being mocked, humiliated, and tortured when he had the power to escape his captors at any time. To Christ, we were all worth it. But coming back to Trigun, why is Vash so determined to save everyone in the first place? Why does he care so much about humans? Well, the primary reason is because of his parent figure, REM Saverem. Despite being nothing but human, Rem raised Vash as a son. For Christians, this calls to mind the image of Mary, the mother of Christ, a mere mortal called to bear and raise the Son of God. But on another level, I think Rem could also represent Mother Eve, since Rem was the one living, at least mentally, in a Garden of Eden mindset. Even the rec room aboard their ship, where Rem often spent time with the boys, has a Garden of Eden vibe, and she raised both the ultimate evil in Knives and the ultimate good in Vash, reminding us of Eve's first children, Cain and Abel. Everyone living on this desert planet now, even generations later, owe their lives to Rem. So in a sense, she's a good representation of the first mother. But on the opposite end of that mother symbolism, oddly enough, I think Rem also represents the father, meaning the father within the Trinity or the Godhead. Since Vash's whole moral compass seems to be determined by Rem. Rem instilled in Vash a love and respect for human life, not only with her words, but with her ultimate sacrifice. Because of that example, Vash made a vow to Rem's memory that he would never kill a soul of those she had died to save. Vash is often seen looking to the sky and speaking to Rem in a sort of prayer, asking for guidance and direction. This reminds me of the father-son dynamic of the New Testament.
I'm so sorry I left you alone. Thank you for protecting my hopes, my dreams, my perfect boy.
But Vash's unrelenting determination to save every life has a second layer to it. It can be summed up in one word: atonement. Vash was led to believe that he was partially responsible for the Big Fall, or the crash which killed millions of people. Later, he was also led to believe he was responsible for killing the entire city of July with his angel arm, the crime which originally earned him his massive bounty. Because Vash believes he's partially responsible for these mass human deaths, he believes he has a responsibility to make up for it, or in other words, to atone.
The last thing he wrote is, "This is my atonement."
No matter how much good you try to atone, they'll never forgive you.
Now, of course, Jesus Christ was sinless, and he had nothing to atone for of himself. Christ atoned for the sins of everyone else. But we could say a similar thing of Vash. Stay with me here. Remember that neither of these tragedies in question were actually Vash's fault. In reality, both of these crimes were committed by his brother Knives, who simply used Vash as an unknowing tool in his genocidal scheme. So Knives is the true criminal in both cases. But despite being completely innocent, Vash felt guilt for playing an unwilling role in the destruction. Because Knives was his brother, he felt a responsibility to make up for it somehow. To sum it up, innocent Vash was essentially taking the sins of his brother upon himself. He had decided to dedicate his life to doing good, saving lives, and risking his own life in the process, in order to atone for the sins of someone else. If that's not Christ-like, I don't know what is. All three iterations of Trigun deviate from each other quite a bit, so explaining just one overarching plot is tough, but they were each led by the same creator, and each have slightly different Christian themes. So let's talk about the primary conflict of the original 1990s anime. In one of its most poignant scenes, we get a flashback of young Vash and Knives back on their ship in their Eden-like rec room. Vash sees a butterfly trapped in a spider's web, and he attempts to save the butterfly before the spider can eat it. While he cautiously proceeds to untangle the butterfly, Knives suddenly kills the spider. Vash is furious because he wanted both the spider and the butterfly to live, but Knives tells him,
Unless the spider caught the butterfly, it would die of starvation anyway. You can't save both, don't you know that?
When I first saw this scene, I remember thinking, actually, Knives is right. Since the spider survives by eating other insects, you can't protect all the spider's victims without starving the spiders as a natural result. I might be okay with that. But ultimately, you have to choose one or the other. You either let nature take its course and let the butterfly be eaten, or you intervene and kill the spider to save the butterfly. But Vash wasn't having it.
I wanted to save both of them, you idiot!
I have to be honest, I thought Vash was being illogical, and he kinda was. But later on, we're forced to see this dilemma from a much different, somewhat uncomfortable perspective. As we've established, both Vash and Knives are plants. Later, Knives explains the reason he despises humans so much.
They'll survive by leeching off the blood of our siblings, gorging themselves like parasites. I can hear the screams of our brethren now, the anguished death cries of our friends.
So Knives, do you like humans or nah? In other words, humans in the world of Trigun feed off of the life of plants while holding them prisoner. In that moment, Knives refers to human beings as, you guessed it, spiders.
Is that why you kill people?
That's right. I kill spiders to save the butterflies.
And suddenly, my perspective changed. Vash really did want to save both the butterflies and the spiders. But when you think about it, Vash is the only butterfly in this scenario. The only true innocent. In this world, all humans are spiders. The good, the bad, even the children, they're all feeding off of his kind to survive. Not because they want to, but because that's just the nature of being a post-fall human. And still, Vash spends a lot of time advocating for humanity, pleading their case.
The humans aren't exploiting them because they want to. They're trying to move forward. I want to believe in them. They're not evil. We can coexist, I know!
In terms of Christianity, we are all spiders because we're all sinners in a post-fall world. We've all hurt someone. We've all been both victim and perpetrator. Jesus Christ was the only true innocent, the only butterfly, and he was killed by spider-like humans. And yet, he still wants to save us all. Coming back to the original anime, Knives didn't want to kill Vash, at least not at first. That wouldn't profit him anything. Instead, Knives was determined to convince Vash to join him in his quest to eliminate humanity. Knives' primary mission was one of recruitment, so Knives adopts a diabolical scheme centered on what? Temptation. Knives gathers 12 of the strongest assassins on the planet, all of whom have special abilities, called the Gung-Ho guns, and sends them after Vash one by one. While these henchmen are undeniably strong, they're ultimately no match for Vash, and Knives knows this. But it's okay, he's not actually expecting his henchmen to be successful. Quite the opposite. He's simply hoping that these Gung-Ho guns are just strong enough to give Vash a run for his money, and that in a moment of vulnerability, Vash will abandon his core principles, as well as his promise to REM, and take a life. In other words, he's hoping Vash will quote-unquote win the battle, but in the process lose himself. This is Knives' twisted attempt at breaking and demoralizing Vash. Knives believes that if he can get Vash to kill, he'd effectively burn the REM out of him. Maybe then it would be easier to convince Vash to join his evil cause. I think it's clear by now that Knives represents Satan in this story, but when you think about it, the entire core plot of the 90s anime could actually be an allegory for the temptations of Christ in the desert. Even the desert setting lends to that imagery. As we know, Satan sent temptation after temptation to Christ during his fast in the desert, hoping that Christ would abandon his mission, his principles, and his promises to the Father. Throughout the story, Vash successfully resists all the temptations Knives throws at him. He continually finds alternative ways out of every conflict without killing a soul. That is, until the final test. When up against Knives' most powerful and trusted servant, Legato, Vash makes the conscious but agonizing decision to kill him execution style in an effort to save those he cares about most. Vash essentially failed the final test, and Knives was way too happy about it. Vash's killing of Legato is a metaphor for sin, or a broken covenant to REM, or rather to God. To make this really obvious, the literal title of this episode is Sin. This is one point where the Vash and Christ similarities deviate, because, as we know, Christ never failed. He never gave in to Satan's most brutal temptations. He lived a perfect, sinless life. But this is fiction we're talking about, and Vash isn't perfect. So he makes this big mistake, and that sends him spiraling down to his lowest moment, a moment in which he almost gives up in every sense. But in the midst of this intense sorrow, Vash's friends help him see that not all hope is lost. He learns an important lesson about repentance and redemption that he passes on to us.
Even if a mistake is made, as long as a person realizes their mistake, it's possible to make it right again.
People who sin say this: it's too late now to stop. A shadow called sin dogs them steadily from behind, silently, without a word. Remorse and agony are repeated only to end up at despair in the end. But the sinners just don't know that if they'd only turn around, there's a light there, a light which keeps shining on them ever so warmly, a light that will never fade.
So even in Vash's failures, he's still teaching us about the gospel of Jesus Christ. In the new Trigun Stampede anime, there are yet different Christian themes and symbolism, some of which we've already covered. Again, there are several overt references to Christianity in the dialogue alone.
Just itching to sacrifice yourself, huh?
Then don your crown of thorns, and prepare to die in your precious sinner's stead.
Knives is well acquainted with the Bible, but his takeaway is that humanity is a lost cause, and he seems to be particularly enamored with any reference to biblical destruction.
God rained fire onto the city of fools.
The flood promises to purify. Let mankind's empire turn to salt. The battle of Armageddon is upon us.
On the last episode of Season 1, after Vash is betrayed by his close friend, we'll get more into that later, Vash is captured and his life is sucked from him by Knives. All hope seems to be lost, and Vash is essentially dead. The memory of REM eventually brings life back into him, and he reawakens. Maybe I'm reaching here, but the imagery in this scene looks like the entrance to a tomb filled with light. And who's the one present to witness this resurrection of sorts? Vash's friend Meryl. This calls to mind Christ's resurrection, with Mary being the first to witness it.
Thank you, Meryl.
The English dub of this finale episode happened to air during Easter weekend, the time of year we celebrate Christ's resurrection. Coincidence? Probably, but a cool coincidence nonetheless. So let's talk about the conclusion of the manga for a minute. Once again, major spoilers are ahead. Toward the end of the series, Knives flies around the planet in a spaceship he calls the Ark, more biblical symbolism, to gather up the plants before his planned destruction of all the humans. He successfully gathers most, which leaves the humans dying of starvation without any power sources. The surviving humans make their way to their last bastion of defense, the City of October. There they make preparations for war. But during this final battle between Knives and his plants versus Vash and the humans, Knives begins a process of co-integrating with the plants. This essentially allows Knives to join the collective minds of the plants, as well as absorb their power, making him pretty much unstoppable. Vash is humanity's last hope. In order to save everyone, Vash literally and painfully plugs himself into the hive mind of all the plants, which includes Knives' mind. Just Vash's very existence within the collective mind invades them with light and goodness, which ultimately helps the plants release their pent-up sadness. Those feelings and memories rain down as feathers, as if from heaven, onto the humans below, which causes the humans to literally feel the pain the plants had been feeling all this time while subjugated. That mutual empathy and understanding causes peace between these two groups, which instantly ends the war. Much of the manga is left up to interpretation, but in my opinion, Vash joining the collective mind is also what triggered Knives' turning point. I believe that empathy went both ways. It helped Knives finally experience feelings for his brother and humankind. So after one last battle between the two brothers, where both were injured, Knives ultimately saves Vash by carrying him to some humans at, yes, a church, who could nurse him back to health. As one last act of gratitude and atonement, Knives uses the remainder of his plant power to grow an apple tree to feed the humans. More Garden of Eden symbolism. And with that, he disappears. So in the end, even Knives was somewhat redeemed, simply by the love, example, and goodness of his brother. Personally, that reminds me of the power Jesus Christ can have in each of us, as we accept him into our hearts. He can dwell within us and change us from the inside out. After 6 months of healing, we last see Vash re-emerging into the world and appearing to his friends, just as he had promised to return, reminding us of Christ's resurrection. And the manga is just replete with Christian images in Naito's breathtaking art style. So those are some of the overarching Christ-like themes I noticed, but we are going to drive it home with some rapid-fire Christian symbolism. Vash's nomadic lifestyle. Like Christ, Vash doesn't have a permanent home. He simply wanders through the desert, going from one town to another.
You couldn't spare a goodbye. These folks will miss you.
Vash's multiple nicknames. The Stampede, the humanoid typhoon, the man who put the hole in the 5th moon, and of course, the 60 billion double-dollar man. It reminds me of the original Man with Many Names. Speaking of names, Vash is a name of Hindu origin, meaning warrior, beautiful, authority, will, wish, power, and divine. Talk about a godly name. Vash's friends Meryl and Millie, who often accompany him on his journeys. Maybe it's just me, but do these names not remind you of another pair of women who were friends of Christ? Mary and Martha, perhaps? Footprints in the sand in the opening theme. Seriously. This.
Is this some sort of twisted Christian science?
I don't know what that means, but we're counting it. Vash's favorite catchphrase.
Love and peace! Love and peace!
Vash's scars. Vash's peacemaking comes at a price. Because he dedicates his life to saving people while refusing to kill anyone, Vash's body is absolutely covered in horrible scars. Scars that stand as a witness of his kindness and self-sacrifice. How could this not call to mind Jesus Christ's scars on his resurrected body? Poignant scars on his hands, feet, and side that remind us of the price he paid to save us. Vash wears a meaningful coat of red, calling to mind the image of Christ's second coming, as recorded in Revelation 19:13. Rem cut Vash's hair when he was a child and somehow made it stand up on end to create his iconic hairdo. But doesn't it kind of resemble a crown? Maybe like one a King of Kings might wear? During this same scene, just before Knives refuses to have his hair cut by Rem in the same way, he sees an apple fall from a tree in front of him. Next thing we see is Knives cutting his own hair alone in a dark room. An apple with a single bite taken out of it can be seen on the floor, reinforcing the fact that this was an act of rebellion, on par with partaking of the forbidden fruit. After he finished his hair, the scissors can now be seen stabbed into the same apple. The symbolism is strong with this one. When Knives refused to be metaphorically crowned by Rem, it's as if he was rejecting a royal inheritance. No pun intended. Elendira, the Crimson Nail, is the lost 13th and strongest member of the Gung-Ho guns. Her power? She can literally shoot giant nails at her enemies. What were the physical tools that killed Christ again? Let's just stop and appreciate this scene where giant nails are being shot out of the air by a weapon shaped like a cross. I'm not suggesting that all of these things were necessarily intended, though I think most were, and I'm sure there's more that I missed. But we've got to move on because no discussion about Christian symbolism in Trigun is complete without addressing Wolfwood. I've saved him for last because there's a lot to unpack here. As far as I can tell, there are at least 3 ways to interpret the character of Nicholas D. Wolfwood, Vash's closest friend and counterbalance. Wolfwood is undeniably good at heart, and Vash is the first to admit this.
Those are the eyes of a good guy.
He's a highly unusual traveling priest.
Well, praise the Lord, hello!
His ministry, if you can call it that, consists of fighting bad guys and charging people to use his portable confessional. Of course, the money he earns isn't for his own benefit, but rather for orphans. As an orphan himself, saving children is the most important thing in the world to him. In a way, Wolfwood has the same end goal as Vash, which is to save people, but he has a much different way of getting there. Wolfwood doesn't mind killing villains if it means saving the innocent.
I won't let any more children suffer! Hey, I don't want you killing anyone, alright? Why don't you just ask me not to breathe?
You couldn't care less about taking human lives if you tried.
Wolfwood sees things in black and white, good and bad, and doesn't exactly extend mercy to the bad ones. They call him Wolfwood the Punisher, a fitting name since justice is his driving force. Because of his jaded mindset, he's completely baffled and even frustrated by Vash's idealistic views. This difference of opinion causes them to butt heads a lot.
Thou shalt not kill, remember? What kind of churchman are you anyway?
But despite their disagreements, Vash and Wolfwood develop a turbulent but deep friendship, and begin to travel parallel to each other. Of course, we eventually learn that Wolfwood wasn't as trustworthy as we'd hoped. Unfortunately, Wolfwood was secretly working for Knives all along. This leads us to our first interpretation, Wolfwood as Judas Iscariot, the traitor. For the sake of the orphans, Wolfwood was cooperating with the enemy and handed Vash over to Knives. Another interpretation is related, Wolfwood as all of us, or the church, meaning Christian churches in general, or the body of Christ. To make this symbol glaringly obvious, Wolfwood is a priest by profession, and lugs around a massive cross everywhere he goes. That cross should be filled with mercy.
That thing's heavy.
That, my friend, is because it's so full of mercy.
But it's actually a highly powerful weapon. Wolfwood's cross is the most all-inclusive weapon in the series. It's both offensive and defensive, because it can also be used as a shield. It has small guns within it, and it's also a rocket launcher. This thing does everything. Sometimes it's hard to tell if Wolfwood is meant to be a criticism of organized religion or a love letter to it. I think it's probably a mixture of both. It's easy to see some negative aspects of religion in Wolfwood. Don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-religion whatsoever. Far from it, I absolutely love my religion, and I believe religion in general is a good thing. But sometimes Wolfwood seems to be a representation of the imperfections within religion. While Vash can see the bigger picture, including a person's past and the events that led them to where they are, Wolfwood often casts judgment based on only what he sees in the moment, rarely considering someone's circumstances or their potential to change. We see this played out clearly in the incident with Rollo. Vash knew Rollo when he was a young boy, but sadly, Rollo was captured as a child sacrifice and experimented on until he became a horrible monster. When this monster version of Rollo began attacking them, Wolfwood made the decision to kill him. Vash and Wolfwood didn't exactly see eye to eye on this decision. The reason this conflict is so compelling is because both Vash and Wolfwood have information the other lacks, so it's easy to see the logic behind both sides. Vash knew Rollo as an innocent child, and therefore he knew Rollo could return to that state of innocence. Vash could see Rollo's past, so he could see potential for his future. But Wolfwood was looking at this scenario from the perspective of only the present moment. Wolfwood knew how Rollo felt right here and now, because he was also tortured and experimented on by the very same people. He knew on a very personal level just how much Rollo was suffering, and therefore he believed the most merciful act was to release him from this life.
Don't play dumb! Why'd you shoot Rollo?
Mercy.
Apparently, that's what Wolfwood meant when he said his cross was full of mercy. From his perspective, it's sometimes the merciful thing to take people out of this miserable world. Considering his dark past, it's easy to see how he'd come to that conclusion.
Keeping it alive would have been torture.
However, in my opinion, Vash was right in this scenario.
It's not for you to decide.
Rollo was showing signs of change just before Wolfwood killed him. To be fair, it did look like Rollo was about to kill his friend, so it's easy to see where Wolfwood was coming from. But remember that this is not literally an argument about whether or not it's okay to kill in certain situations. On the surface, Trigun seems like a story about nonviolence or pacifism, and yes, there's certainly a strong element of that in the story, but if you limit your interpretation to that alone, you'll miss perhaps a deeper layer. I think we've established by now that Trigun is a highly metaphorical story about spiritual and theological issues. Often, killing is used as a metaphor for sin. Metaphorically, Rollo was a person in a state of sin or spiritual disorder. Vash saw potential for him to be saved, while Wolfwood saw too much of himself in this tortured boy. Wolfwood felt no hope for his own personal salvation, and therefore he projected his hopelessness onto Rollo. In other words, Vash, as Christ, saw hope for transformation and repentance, while Wolfwood, as the judgmental churchman, metaphorically put a bullet through Rollo's potential, stifled his growth, and condemned him to spiritual death. Wolfwood is a flawed man who wants to help people, but doesn't always see the best option. He's a man who loves Vash, and on some level wants to have Vash's idealistic views, but feels like it's impossible. There's simply too much darkness in the world. We can't reform it, the best we can do is eliminate it when possible. And to be honest, much of what Wolfwood says makes sense. Because Wolfwood is such a flawed and relatable character, I think the symbol of Wolfwood being the church or followers of Christ is valid. We have good intentions, but we make mistakes. We are nearsighted, and we make uninformed judgment calls about others. We all need repentance. We are all Wolfwood. One scene from the manga illustrates this so beautifully. Wolfwood had gone to wrap up some loose ends in his past, and ended up in the fight of his life. Well, it wasn't much of a fight, actually. He was definitely dying. And at this point, we'd been following Wolfwood around for several chapters and hadn't seen a hint of Vash in a while. But just when things seemed perfectly hopeless, Vash suddenly appears to save the day in full angel mode, wings, feathers, and all. Wolfwood is stunned. He basically says, "Why are you here? You have more important battles to fight. What are you doing here? Why did you come all the way here to save me?" In this climactic moment, Vash proved Wolfwood's pessimistic thoughts wrong. There's always hope for salvation, even for him. Wolfwood, just like everyone else, deserves a chance to be saved. I don't think it's a coincidence at all that the art on this particular page highlights the cross atop a church, as well as Vash's angel wings at the bottom. This was a message, and an inspiring one at that. So far, we've spoken a lot about Wolfwood's weaknesses, but that doesn't give us the whole picture. Part of what makes Wolfwood such an interesting character is that, despite his fundamental disagreements with Vash, his point of view is usually portrayed in a manner that gives them some merit as well. His willingness to kill when necessary saved several innocent people throughout the story. Wolfwood, at his core, is a good person with good intentions. Therefore, I think there's at least one more interpretation of Wolfwood that works equally well. Wolfwood as Jesus Christ. What if Vash wasn't the only representation of Christ in this story? What if Vash and Wolfwood together were both different aspects of Christ? Vash is only a representation of the meek, sacrificial, peacemaking side. What about the just and bold side of Christ? What if Vash the healer symbolized the God of the New Testament, and Wolfwood the punisher symbolized the God of the Old Testament? Vash being the side of Christ that turned the other cheek, and Wolfwood being the side of Christ that overturned tables. In other words, Wolfwood is the embodiment of justice, while Vash is the embodiment of mercy. And of course, Jesus Christ perfectly embodies both. The fact that Wolfwood constantly bears a heavy cross that he uses to eliminate evil is a great visual representation of his desire to meet the demands of justice in this fallen world. It's no wonder Vash and Wolfwood are constantly in an ideological war with each other, yet make such a great team. They're the opposing but complementary sides of the same Christ whole. Vash needs Wolfwood, and Wolfwood needs Vash. This idea is reinforced at the climax of the original anime. After Wolfwood's repentance and tragic death, Vash takes up Wolfwood's cross and meaningfully carries it to meet his brother in the final battle. To me, this symbolizes the fact that Vash was actually taking Wolfwood with him in his heart, admitting that Wolfwood wasn't all wrong. Vash was becoming a better balance of both mercy and justice. Maybe we could all benefit from a better balance of both Vash and Wolfwood within ourselves. I know I could. Maybe we need a little more Wolfwood in us to stand up for the little guy and protect the innocent. Maybe we also need some more Vash. And like Vash, maybe we could be a little more forgiving, more kind to those who weren't kind to us, and try to save those who maybe don't even deserve saving. Because at the end of the day, doesn't that describe all of us? Trigun in all its forms is a masterpiece. It's incredibly entertaining, with lovable characters, an abundance of humor, intense emotions, amazing fight scenes, stunning art, and deep theological and moral questions. It's got everything. Every time I watch or read anything from this story, I'm even more stunned at the creative genius of Yasuhiro Naito. There's so much to dissect in a multi-layered story like Trigun. We really only scratched the surface. Did you notice any other Christian symbolism or themes in Trigun? Or did you come to different conclusions entirely? Let me know what you think. Thanks so much for watching, and have a great day.